Welcome to yet another episode of Disruption Talks, focused on sustainability in the retail industry. For those who haven't been with us in the previous sessions, it's already the fourth time we're meeting to discuss this topic. So if you haven't seen the previous session, I highly encourage you to check our YouTube channel. All the recordings are there. And also you can find the key takeaways on our blog that are published after each episode. And today we'll discuss how we can reduce the waste across the supply chain and the role of digital in driving the change. And I have two amazing speakers from Netguru today. Jinder.
Hi everyone.
Hello,
Excited to carry on this conversation. I have a bit of a cold, if I'm being honest. The weather has very much changed here in Poland, but I don't think that will stop me to talk about sustainability today.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite side of the earth, so we're coming into the summer in Africa, which I'm really happy about. Jinder is Innovation Consultancy Lead at Netguru. He's been involved in multiple projects consulting businesses in the wide variety in consumer sectors. And he's been also involved in many projects that aim to solve problems related to sustainability. And we also have today David. Hello, David.
Hello, Nat. Thank you. Thank you for calling me amazing. That's really nice of you.
Of course. David is a senior innovation consultant at Netguru with experience in both client and agency environments, bonding technology with operations, sales with marketing. He's a fan of data-driven decisions, which I'm definitely going to ask about later. But I want to start with more general questions before we dive into examples of solutions to tackle the problems. And I'd like to, David, start with you. What retailers can do to take more accountability for their supply chains?
To take more accountability, that's actually quite, I would say, a difficult questions. First of all, they have to care more. They have to have the incentive in order to care more. They have to look for, I would say, if you want to attack the sustainability problem, look for sustainable solutions. And these solutions are solutions that bring value to them in order for them to care about that case. As you mentioned, it's really important because, as for example, HSBC professionals claim is that only 20% of the emissions are under control of the retailers, of the final loops of the supply chain. These are the companies that are responsible for only 20% of the emission, and the 80% of the emissions, so the core of the problem, lies elsewhere. Therefore, being, I would say, transparent, actually focusing on that matter, trying to ideate some solutions that can remain sustainable and look for solutions, as I said, that bring the value to all the stakeholders. This is the, in my opinion, go-to strategy.
But if there is such a big part beyond their control, shouldn't they take all the decisions to actually gain more control of the supply chain? How can they do it?
I'm always against like trying to simplify the things in the world in that way. I don't believe there is an option for them to cover the whole supply chain. In some cases, in some industries, it's effective. For some huge companies and conglomerates, that might be effective. Take care of all the parts of the supply chain and take care, therefore, of the sustainability from the very beginning, starting with raw materials, whatever that is, petrol, if that's oil, if that's gas, whatever comes to your mind, and ending up with the final product. So I know a bouncing ball in the end. It's sometimes possible, but that's not how the real world operates. The most of economy relies on small and medium businesses. Therefore, in their cases, it's impossible. Especially if their business is focused on being the last loop in the chain. This is something I have experienced in. So being, the B2C company just distributes the products. It's hard to imagine that they could, I would say, have all the loops of the chain under their command.
So I'm
Jinder?
going to add some thoughts here because in a way I agree with David, but I also really wanted David here because I knew I would find elements where we would disagree as well, right? So yeah, David makes a very strong point, right? It is very difficult for those that are more on the distribution side, on the B2C side, to control every single stage of, say, the manufacturing or the logistics process, right? However, one thing I keep saying quite often is there needs to be more elements of kind of collectivism, right? And it is very much around this idea of transparency. David's most likely correct that it is much easier for those larger organizations to move in a way where they will be able to increase the transparency. And first and foremost, they need to increase that in order to have better overview of their current actions, of those that are manufacturing within their supply chains and so forth, right? You won't be able to make changes unless you know what the problem is in the first place. But if we go back to this idea of working as a collective, it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of one player across that supply chain to answer all the questions if they are, for example, a small or medium business. That doesn't mean that systems can't be put into place, especially with technology where it is now, to understand the full kind of damaging footprint that might have been occurring at various stages across that supply chain. One thing I would say specific to the fashion apparel industry is in 2017, there was a pledge, I think it was called Fiber to Retail, and it is that idea of transparency, a transparency pledge where people will work together in order to identify the true kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, the true impact of their actions at various points across that chain.
And if we speak about those points across the whole supply chain, so we can probably divide them into 3 parts. So that will be manufacturing, then logistics, and then how we handle the waste. And let's just dive into each of them separately and discuss how technology can help making a positive impact. And if we start with manufacturing, there is a big problem of overproduction and overconsumption. Manufacturers in many industries within retail, whether that's fashion, food, produce too much stuff that ends up in the landfills eventually. So how can we make the supply meet demand meet supply with technology? And I'd like David to start because I know you have experience there and some interesting thoughts.
Of course, when it comes to the supply chain, there are many parts of the supply chain. Usually the supply chains that we are used to is not just a 3-way supply chain. It's usually much, much, much longer. So you can call a manufacturer actually many steps in the loop can be called as a manufacturer. Therefore, the waste occurs on each of these steps because, focusing on raw materials, there will be waste produced, there will be raw materials that will not be used. Then focusing on the textile itself, there will be textiles that won't be used. Then producing t-shirts out of them, there will be t-shirts that will not be sold and something will have to be done with them. Therefore, the waste is multiplied throughout the whole supply chain. One of the solutions when it comes to technology to that is using artificial intelligence and machine learning, getting to know the patterns, trying, of course, preparing proper data and backing the system with them. We can actually try to forecast in a more precise way something that we already do right now, but very often manually, especially among smaller companies. When I say manually, it means that at some step of the process, it's a person it's an employee that has to make a decision. And usually it's not that he's just left with the yes no decision. It's usually some deductions, some forecasts, some predictions, some assumptions that he has to make before making the final decision. You can, as I said, improve it by using AI and machine learning, and actually ending up with automating such decisions. Because if the input is good enough, we can fully rely on our computers to do the work for us, and trying to forecast based on the data that is an input there, whether that's historical sales, or the number of products being usually used, or the number of goods and materials being wasted on the way. We can use all these data as input. Of course, as I mentioned, this data has to be properly prepared. This is something that many teams, many data management teams, take care of in many companies. There are actually employees focusing on making this data usable, and therefore try to forecast in which point we should aim. And I believe this is one of the many smart solutions, because, as I said, it brings value to many parts of the chain. It ends up with boosting our revenue if we meet the right demand, plus cutting down the costs, because we don't have that much waste as we did in the previous times.
It's more environmentally friendly because we don't have that much waste.
The-
And
Exactly, and
yeah.
that's a sustainable and smart solution, because you don't have to persuade anybody that there is value there. Everybody knows that. Everybody is willing. We have the same goal, and it ends up, with bringing value to everybody around the chain. So us consumers, the producer, and also anybody, providing them with materials or textiles.
Jinder, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, so I agree with David fully about the potential of AI, especially very, very early on, but obviously dependent on how much of that data you can capture to kick off the use of AI. And then I would also suggest, if we look at the other end of that value chain, right, and that customer-facing side, the opportunities to utilize tools, especially as they are improving, such as virtual try-ons, where we can test demand of likely concepts, etc., before we put them into production, right? So that idea of understanding what demand might likely be is kind of extremely important. If we think about the incentives, right, for retailers, it is, and it always will be, the idea of maximizing profitability. And there is a fear among some retailers that, to throw away a garment will work out cheaper than not being able to sell one because you haven't manufactured enough, right? So it's about finding that right balance. And there was a tendency traditionally to use something like the news vendor problem in game theory to try and understand the likelihood of demand, right? The best way that you can maximize your profitability. And I think that's the challenge here. That's the mindset that has to be changed. And the best way to do that is by utilizing technologies in order to make retailers confident that what they are doing is not only maximizing their profitability by matching supply to demand, but they are also increasing their efficiency because they're not overproducing. And for some retailers, overproducing is less of a threat than underproducing.
Yeah, that's usually what the case is, because when you think of the alternative costs of how much does it cost you, from my perspective, especially if you have, I would say, in a medium small size company, you have, let's say, 100 SKUs, and for each there is a standard deviation when it comes to sales, and it's not usually not products that can lie on the shelf forever and wait to be sold, which actually also brings some cost to the distributor, to the retailer. So, multiplying it by the number of SKUs and the numbers of decisions being made, this is actually some place where automation and computers can highly improve our game.
And
you,
just to add to the kind of benefits of artificial intelligence, right, is yes, extremely good for demand forecasting, but it's also that opportunity, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, here, but that ability to optimize pricing in real time. And then there's also that opportunity to respond to market shocks immediately, right? So, for example, if you're a grocery retailer, the ability to understand that you might not get your supply of a certain produce, and perhaps you can quickly order something else to replace it, right? So artificial intelligence has kind of lots of benefits across that entire supply chain.
and you mentioned,
Yeah,
go on.
I fully agree with Jinder with what you just said. In such situation that you cannot get the goods from the provider you usually operated, but also in a situation where you see, a drastic demand. Let's make it during the 2 days at your grocery store, and you can actually predict quite quickly. You don't have to wait somebody to look into the data and somebody, actually see with their eyes. Okay, we ran out of bananas, but actually ask your system to do it for you and to make a decision whenever there is such situation that okay, we have to buy some extra good. And I fully agree that it brings up our pace when it comes to making decision to the next level.
And you mentioned that we need to have usable data. So how can we prepare especially as a smaller company, small to medium enterprise? How can we prepare to be ready to use artificial intelligence to help us make those decisions?
I mean, it depends how you package it, right? You want to understand what the capacity of the consumer, of the user, is going to be, and it's a case of giving them the information, the correct information, and in a way that's easily digestible but most importantly actionable. And that's one of the kind of key benefits of machine learning in general, right? That idea of not only diagnostic but predictive and prescriptive analytics. So things that can not just say what is going to happen, but what you should do in response to this. And I'm
David?
waiting for David to argue with me.
No, I wouldn't argue on that.
We're on the agreement.
From not always there are some topics that we don't agree on, but from the small or medium-sized retailers perspective, it's sometimes these small change. It's often that the spreadsheet does the work for you, because if your selling volumes are not that high, the standard deviation, therefore the place to improve it, and therefore invest beforehand in a technology that will take your game to the next level, is very often not useful. It's when the scale occurs, that's when artificial intelligence and machine learning actually become really helpful. I cannot fully predict what it will look like in the future, where we will be at. I believe that in the upcoming years, I would say 10 years perspective, the AI and ML solutions can be actually grabbed from the shelf even by small suppliers, because they will be so achievable and so cheap that it will make sense for them to take advantage of that, even if their volumes are less than thousands throughout the month.
And you mentioned virtual try-ins before, and I believe there are many more different examples of technologies that can help on the design, prototyping, creating prototyping, the first prototyping of the either garments or different types of products. So what will be the role of those kind of solutions? How
So
they can diminish the waste
David.
on the first.
I believe already 3D modeling was a huge change when it comes to production side. Any company producing big numbers of products, usually to final, not only B2C but also B2B, when they see they invest a lot of money in having their 3D modeling tools inside their house. That was a huge improvement. The next improvement was actually being able to quite quickly print it out, not having to change your whole production line in order to produce that specific prototype. 3D modeling took it to the next level, and actually we are at this place where we can discuss metaverse, and huge changes probable to occur in the upcoming years, where you could actually check what the whole process might look like, fully digital, without making any other investments than your time spent on the technology and on the solution, learning what you expect from it. Besides that, there won't be any investments that will have to be done to check it whether or not this product will fulfill its expectations. So that's a huge game changer. This is something which is already happening. For example, digital twins of many factories. This is, of course, something available right now for big players, but this is a thing that's actually taking place, where a factory, before being organized, before being built, there is a digital twin being created in order to plan everything in the most optimal way when it comes to placing departments in the building, when it comes to organizing the production line. It all can be done digitally. Therefore, and can be done digitally, then validated with a number of examples, number of products, number of actions being pushed through that process, and we will see whether or not it's bulletproof, what should be our optimal solution, and therefore, again, minimize the waste being produced, and especially minimizing the, I would say, most important resource, so the time being spent by human resources on solving that specific problem, or on going on foot from one department to another.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jinder, any other examples?
Yeah, so I would say it's more available now, right? But I was working on virtual reality kind of digital twins as well, but back about 6-7 years ago. But at the opposite side of that chain, in the actual retail stores themselves. But as David said, that enabled us to have not only the clients, the retail clients, walk through the space and see how it was going to be set up, what to change there and then before we even started construction. Mm-hmm. They allowed us to test the final designs with real consumers, with people who would be frequenting these places. And it does save a lot of time, money, pain, I will say, and that idea of reducing waste as well. So all of a sudden we don't have to change or pivot construction 6 months in. We can make those changes immediately, right? However, I did want to slightly pivot the question away. And that's probably towards the technology I probably know least about, but the one I'm probably most excited about in the supply chain. But I would love to hear, David, and your thoughts, Natalia, on the Internet of Things and how that is likely to help in the battle against waste, against manufacturing waste, logistics waste, and obviously material, etc. waste.
Yeah, this is, definitely when it comes to the first solution that comes to my mind that will be improved by Internet of Things is tracking. When it comes to tracking pallets being delivered by trucks, when it comes to tracking products, how they travel alongside the whole factory, or how they travel all the way from the factory to the final consumers. This is something that can be improved, and tracking it properly, provides us with certain KPIs that we can focus on, and therefore trying to improve this from that side when it comes to mileage being covered. So something very important for transportation, the waste being produced in the factory. Yeah, I consider Internet of Things, we cannot see that obvious commercial use of Internet of Things by now. We are still getting there. There are still more and more, thanks to technology, lately products being introduced to the market. Therefore, it's not that easy to come up, with very specific ideas, but trying to combine all the tools from the environment in one in one one system that they could communicate with each other, talk to each other. That will definitely be a huge change for the whole retail industry specifically, where the number of SKUs and that number of products being traveled, being manufactured, being taken from one side to another is huge.
And we're slowly moving to the second part of the supply chain, which is logistics. But before that, I'd like to ask about some examples when it comes to using technology in design, in reducing waste, in prototyping. I think Nike is one of the companies that communicates it very prominently on their website, how they leverage modeling, 3D printing, and different kind of technologies in their design process. Do you know any more examples of companies doing that?
Well, I'm going to use Nike again, but Nike and IKEA, I know, use one of the companies we spoke about last week, Nat, which is Daiku. And this is a company that looks to dye materials without the use of water. And as we know, water consumption can be heavy in the manufacturing process. I believe it's something like 20,000 liters of water for a kilo of cotton. So that's a good approach. The idea, I suppose, is how scalable is it at the moment? If we remember our conversation with Gio in our first disruption talk, part of the limitations to what we can effectively do is our limitations on the supply of those materials, those sustainable materials, right? And there's a lot of companies I've seen that have been looking at what they can do in regards to the supply of sustainable materials. So H&M use something called circulose in some of their clothing, and they were the first retailer, I believe, to utilize that. And it's a 100% recycled material. It's something that's recyclable and made from recycled materials as well. And then when we come to actual retail stores themselves, I know a company in the UK called Spared. They're very new. But what they do is take waste from the manufacturing byproducts and look to transform it into something unique, something that's actually luxury fashion would like to use one of their follies, one of their display units, for example. And they use the kind of things you find washed up on a beach these days: plastic, shells, cork, masonry, paper, all types of waste in order to make these materials.
It's actually funny that you, Natalia, and you, Jinder, mentioned Nike, because when discussing this topic, when discussing 3D modeling, it's very often the footwear industry that comes to our mind, because it's not only Nike doing it very well, but also Adidas and other big brands actually showing us that, hey guys, this is what we do. This is how 3D modeling improves your lives on a daily basis. And these are, the products that we've been using for, I would say, quite many years. But it's 3D modeling is also very useful in these industries, in these branches where the final product has many components, like electronics, like computers. Nvidia is a company that is working strongly on their Omniverse, and they've been strongly working on taking advantage of 3D modeling in their products. It's also the same with Apple. Apple even going the other way around, and not so long ago offering AR kits, so a tool enabling us to, by using photos with our iPhone. However, we have to take, I would say, 120 photos in order to have a proper model. But just by taking photos, we can create a 3D model ourselves. Actually, the other way around, because of something that we already have, not trying to prototype it, but it's still can be very handful. So summing it up, it can be used in much simpler products like shoes, like clothing, but it's the also electronics, the components, some component that has to perfectly fit with some other tool. This is where it becomes even more handy.
And just to add more about shoe companies, right? An example I quite like, if we go back to the idea of transparency, is assets with the assets lifecycle assessment, and it's the idea of monitoring their emissions and their CO footprint of each of their trainers' shoes during its production lifecycle.
So we've got one question. I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, Irene, but she's asking about, is reducing waste in manufacturing cost effective?
This is something I mentioned in the beginning. Obviously, it has to bring that value. It's not always that it has to be cost effective. I fully understand what Irene is saying. I even fully agree with what she's saying, because that's the easier argument to use. If you provide a manufacturer with technology that not only reduces the waste, not only reduces the amount of water being used in the production, the amount of textiles being used in the production, but also cuts down the costs, improves the bottom line, that is, I would say, a no-brainer for such manufacturer. And this is what I consider as one of the sustainable solutions. But even if you are able to get with the technology somewhere close to the costs that it takes for them to produce the goods in the traditional way, and then ask your final consumer to pay a little bit extra for that, that is also possible. This is one of the way of doing that. I would say in most of the cases, I agree that having a solution, reducing waste solution that is not cost effective, is not a sustainable solution. It's not something that will stay with us for longer unless being improved, because there is some certain point to which we as consumer or manufacturer or producers or brands are willing to pay extra for that solution. If we cross that border, then it's no longer appealing to neither of these sides.
So I agree with David. A very strong argument made there. And even though before he started talking, I wanted to find something to disagree on. I fully agree, right? And you would look at it as a holistic image, right? A holistic picture. Now, every organization is a collection of individuals, and we're all incentivized in different ways. And the idea is that if I'm in charge of just manufacturing, then perhaps in the here and now, in the short term, it doesn't make sense for me because I can't see the value of it. But you would hope that the purpose, the mission is kind of shared across that supply chain. Someone takes accountability and explains the reasoning, tells the story as it is. And then it's a case of, it's not necessarily an investment to be made in the short term, just for short-term gains, but I would consider it almost like a CapEx investment into your company, right? And trying to understand the benefits it can have, not only in regards to your
bottom line.
To your bottom line, thank you, David, but also to how you are viewed, how you can create advocates, how you are creating differentiators and competitiveness, because it is a subject that's going to be important. And it takes one fault along that supply chain to change people's perception of you as an organization.
Yeah. So answering Irene's question, it's possible. It's not very often not the case nowadays. And I'm really, really strongly believing and willing for that to change in the future. Adding, that's the last touch to that. Sometimes, companies even consider this as their marketing, as their PR costs. So, having, for example, 8% of their energy being used in manufacturing process provided by a sustainable company or from green resources, but they have to pay more compared to the other energy. They are willing to do that because then they can claim, okay, so 8% of our energy is clean, and consider that as a marketing or a PR play, which is fully understandable. If for us as consumers this information is valuable, then we will incentivize the companies to further invest in such solutions.
And I suppose it's also that idea, right? As we see a lot of research where it says customers are willing to pay X amount more for companies that share a similar purpose. But if you have the right technologies, you don't have to necessarily increase your costs as well. You can look to, if anything, drive those costs down, increase those efficiencies through that use of technology. And not only are you then looking at it from a sustainability perspective and a perception perspective, but also from a cost optimization perspective.
Definitely.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer, and I really encourage all the participants to ask more questions. But let's just get back to logistics. So I brought up some stats, and international trade-related freight transport currently accounts for around 30% of all transport-related CO2 emissions from fuel combination and more than 7% of global emissions. So that is a lot. And how technology can make a difference here. And I believe there are many layers to it, because definitely we can also use AI and machine learning to better predict how we can plan our routes, how we can ship all our products. But I also would like to speak about drones, because I know that, David, you're a big fan of those.
That's why I've been smiling for the last minutes. I'm waiting for the drone
So I'm
topic.
just going to start with an open question: how technology can make a positive impact in the logistics, in the retail industry.
So what you just mentioned, I believe that's a very important factor. That's a very important part of the problem. So reducing the mileage being covered by whether these are ships, trains, airplanes, or trucks, as you know, as delivery. This is something that is very, very important. And as you said, using ML and AI solutions can improve that. There are many companies already investing with that. In that, as an example, Procter and Gamble, P&G, they're trying to reduce they are actually claiming that they've reduced year by year. I believe they claim 30% reduced the mileage being covered by their means of transportation using certain improvements in that field. And drones is, I would say, the next go-to. Actually, talking to Jinder, I believe during one of the Twitter Spaces or Disruption Talks before, I said that I believe drones will be the next disruption in the logistics, in the transportation as a whole, and I still believe so, because first of all, they are electrically powered. We have to focus, of course, obviously, focus on where the electric power comes from. This is also a very important factor, if not the most important factor in that case. But yeah, that's definitely an improvement. Second of all, the mileage being covered by them is much shorter. They just go up and usually travel, if they are able in that environment, in that neighborhood, to travel in this straight line. They do so, and they're actually going straight to you, straight to the point, straight from the point that they need to go from, straight to the point where they're heading. Therefore, they're reducing waste when it comes specifically to that. And they can be, what we discussed during one of the talks, they can be fully autonomous as the years go by. Probably they have to be overlooked by a human, especially in the beginning, but that's something that can be quickly done and quickly achieved in the upcoming years. And I strongly believe for it to be another disruptor.
Mm-hmm. And I know that currently, like, obviously drones cannot cover really long distances yet, but do you believe that in the far-fetched future it will be possible to ship your, because right now they're just like solving most of the issues in the last mile delivery and quick commerce. But do you believe that they're going to be traveling on long distances?
I believe so. If you listen to what our friend CEO from Mana, Bobby, mentioned during our disruption forum, is that why is it becoming even more and more accessible? So the solution in his case for the last mile delivery is that there have been some significant technological improvements in the last years, and batteries was one of them. As we know, a lot of smart heads have been working on that for many years, including Elon Musk. We are getting better and better at that. We're getting there that we can have our car powered by batteries travel the similar distance, to gasoline cars, or sometimes even bigger. It was something that was not believed in not so long ago. Therefore, when it comes to drones and actually trying to make these batteries even smaller and smaller, I believe, yes, I believe that's just a matter of time, because the outcome, the value being brought by that solution is so huge that companies will invest huge amounts just to get there as quickly as possible.
And
are we talking
just to add,
okay, go on, Jinder.
sorry, I was going to say, just to add to what David is saying, right, is there's a lot of other dependencies on current models that are used, right, in logistics. And I'm going to use the example of my home country, the UK, and we can see what's happening at the moment in the supply chain there, in not only fuel, gasoline, but also in groceries and stuff. And this is a dependency that something like drones could help to solve, right? I don't think we're there yet, but I don't think we're as far away as some people believe we are.
Mm-hmm. So that was my question. Are we talking about 3, 5, 10 years, 50 years?
If I was to predict, I would say that I'm actually quoting Bobby again, what he promised us during Disruption Forum, that from 3 to 5 years, we will have our goods in Europe delivered by drones every now and then. I don't know if he mentioned on a regular basis. That's a strong claim, but he seems like a guy that I could believe. So I believe so. That's an expert in that field, and I believe this is something that will happen. And as I said, the whole chains of thoughts is organized in my head. I can see it coming. Therefore, I truly and strongly believe that it's about to happen. I'm waiting for the times for me being delivered from my flat in Warsaw to the office here where I'm at now by drone. This is my go-to place.
Sorry, did you say that you're hoping that you get delivered from your home?
That I get
to
delivered by
okay.
drone.
just
Like,
checking.
this one person drone that I could just enter, and then within 4 minutes find my place here in the Warsaw office. Maybe by then we won't need offices at all, but this is a whole nother story.
Yeah, I think we're nearer the working from home model than you being delivered by a drone right now.
Don't ruin my dreams, Jinder.
Sorry.
I prefer working from an office, and I hope I will be delivered by drone in the upcoming years. Maybe not in that case, definitely not 5, but in a longer perspective, I believe that it is possible.
I do believe that teleportation will eventually become possible. So that's another solution. A little bit way more far-fetched, but we'll see. And what's your bet, Jinder?
So I do agree with David in that I do think drones, but I think first and foremost we'll see them penetrate even more that last mile of delivery before we see them as an everyday in the kind of logistical fleet management sense. But then I also think it's that idea of how do all these technologies interact with one another? How do all these various parts of this value chain kind of work together? So if we go back to that idea of virtual try-ons and even virtual scanning, that idea of that ability to make more confident purchase choices means we will order the things we want more confidently in the first place and reduce that idea of returns. If we look at some stats from Shopify, I believe they said around 40% of returns reduced by 40% on items that had an element of virtual try-on. That's actually a huge number. So there's a tendency now that, yes, we purchase and return online all the time, but we also have a tendency now, especially with free shipping and free returns, to try on at home. And it's that ability to kind of reduce that would also have a great impact on that logistics and that fleet management. So it's that idea of how do all these parts work together. And even though we know there are 3 issues in the sustainability challenge: manufacturing, logistics, and waste, it's about creating the system in a way and enabling it through technology to kind of improve that transparency and that interaction across the entire thing. Also, what I would say, I made a bet about 5 years ago that by 2020, 3D printing would have made a sizable impact on Amazon and that idea of a long-tail business model, right? It hasn't happened, but I think that's something that we're likely to see re-emerge in a few years' time, that idea of being able to 3D print certain items that once again would reduce the kind of burdens. I'm sure you've all been online and ordered what's turned out to be a piece of plastic, whether it was a bolt or something you needed for your home. That ability to print those, and in essence, the idea, and I suppose shoes is another one that kind of was far ahead of other industries, other parts of the industry. That ability to print, so you buy designs rather than materials, you reduce shipping and so forth. But I'm still waiting for that penetration rate to increase. It was a bet. I'm glad I did not put any money on, put it that way.
I love the idea of buying projects, not buying materials. That is something very interesting. I really never thought about that perspective, but yeah, having a 3D printer in my home could be an improvement.
And also, like going back to the virtual try-ons, because right now, what we do with returns, like it's basically convenient. We can order 5 pieces of clothing, try all of them, and just return them. So I guess we are right now waiting for the virtual try-ons to be as convenient or more convenient to us, convince the. And
I don't think it's a convenience thing personally. I think it's a realism thing. So that idea of making the products.
I agree that it is a lot of about like how it actually looks and how it feels, because there's like the fashion and the garments are not like the fashion experience is not flat. So we want to have this like 3D experience. But like at the same time, I do believe there is a little bit of convenience side of it, because it's way easier if you can just do it from the comfort of your home without ordering, without the hassle of like waiting for delivery, and then sending it back. It is easy, fairly easy, but it's still a little bit of friction. Whereas like if we don't have that friction, and we can just try it with the virtual try-ons with AR, I believe it's going to be more.
So I agree, Nat, but I would like to create some friction if that's okay with you. It's a very good point. Convenience is really, really important, right? Especially for the modern day consumer. But it's also that secondary side of it. And you mentioned the words how it feels, right? So that touch of materiality we can only really get either by ordering it to our homes or going to the brick and mortar store. And this idea of, does the brick and mortar store need to really, what's the word I'm looking for? Stock every single color, every single size. And it's that idea of, if I have virtual try on and I try on the green jacket that's available in my size, I can go into the changing rooms or use my smart device and quickly try it on in different colors. And then I can make a purchase there and then. And therefore we have these brick and mortar stores as our changing rooms almost, right? I don't know why my camera just switched off, apologies. We can have these brick and mortar stores as our complete changing rooms. And that idea of purchase anywhere, once again, adds to that element of convenience. So I can order it in the store, I can buy it there and then, and it can be shipped to my house, ideally in David's drone, while it drops him off to the office, right? But
By the
yeah, once again, it's the idea of an entire system and thinking in systems rather than thinking in that individual experience and that individual element.
Yeah, holistic approach. I want to touch to one last topic, quick commerce.
This is another one for David, I believe.
what would be the question?
How quick commerce is changing, like is making a positive impact in the retail industry?
Oh, it's quite a difficult question. It gives, great value when it comes to consumers. It gives great value when it comes to investors, but when it comes to environments, of course, obviously, when the goods are delivered by bikes and you have a dark store close to you, in your neighborhood, therefore, obviously, the emission being produced by the car, the specific car, taking your delivery, your product from that specific part of the town and taking it all the way to you. This is in that, in that equation, that solution, that quick commerce delivering it with a bike is a good solution. But when you think, about the number of dark stores that have to be taken into the consideration, the number of products that have to be placed in that specific dark store, I would say that the equation is not that simple and cannot be answered, that easily.
So I would like to add to David's answer, if that's okay. So there's an element of dark stores, right, being built within the cities, so within existing sites, they take over. And for me, that's still a better solution than greenfield sites. So think of your Walmart and Costco's normally just outside of the city. So A, it's a lot of building. B, it has an effect on local communities. And C, you have to drive there normally, right? And it's that idea of utilizing things like geolocation technology, etc., of how you can establish this dark store network in order to create these kind of hub and spoke models to best service your communities and so forth. And once again, I think technology has a role to play here. And I know that David is a fan of geolocation services and technologies. But for me, it has a lot more benefits than creating these mega stores. And once again, Natalia, I'm going to use your argument of convenience. It's become a lot more important. Younger people, like David, are very demanding and they require their goods here and now. And quick stores kind of allow for that. Greenfield sites, not so much. And they are normally a day out, as I'm sure anyone who's visited an IKEA or a Walmart will attest to. So it's that idea of how to utilize technology and where your dark stores should be. And also this idea of hub and spoke models across cities. And then it's also where's that distribution center lie? And now I actually want to use Walmart as probably the best example of a hub and spoke model. In the US, that's how they developed, how they built, and how they kind of invaded the whole country. And I think we'll start seeing that a lot more now with these quick commerce models and these dark stores combined.
So I agree with some sentences that Jinder said. I don't agree specifically with the sentence where he said that I am the more demanding type, that we're the... I agree that the generation is getting more and more, generation by generation, we're getting more and more demanding. But it's not maybe me is not the best example. I agree with some of the arguments that Jinder made, but we also have to remember that when it comes to quick commerce, it is often that we order, a snack, a bottle of beer, or a protein bar being delivered from one place to us. Whereas when going to Walmart, we usually buy things, for the whole week or two. So the equation becomes even more and more complicated. I'm not the one already to judge, whether or not the equation is pro or against the cucumbers. What I can already judge, and this will be like a good wrap up. I don't know if you're having any further sustainability events, but the number one thing that each of us can do, and everybody around the world can stop shouting about sustainability and focus also on that specific case, is that we have to slow down a little bit. We have to be less demanding when it comes to that. We don't have to fully focus on us having the t-shirt being delivered to us the next day, because we just bought it and we already need it, or as I mentioned, our food or drink or bar being delivered with just this one product for us in the next 20 minutes. It's in that equation, we cannot eat the cookie and have the cookie at the same time. If you want to be more sustainable, slow down a little bit, try to focus on the things that you do, try to be a little bit less demanding, and not continue being the hypocritical type, claiming to be sustainable and still taking taking advantage of all the great achievements that the capitalistic world has taken us to.
So I want to disagree with David, just as he disagreed with me on two things very, very quickly. So that idea of you ordering one protein bar, I guarantee that protein bar, though, is more likely to be eaten than everything you would buy from Walmart. And that takes us back to something we spoke about last week, which was the idea of exploration problems in waste, right? And then the second thing is digital enablement and ensuring that we have solutions, even if they are that idea of mitigators, is an easier thing to influence than behavioral change. And behavioral change is that idea of changing mindsets. And even though we will see an increase in this, I think there's certain elements that we will, not negative effects, but we will see increasing. And that's why that idea of a need for increased convenience, increased duration, and so forth within retail especially. And I'm going to put it back to an example here, David. Back in 2010, I believe the digital patience threshold was around 30 seconds, right? It's currently at below 2 seconds. So that's to give you an indicator that it's quite hard to shift a body of people into a certain direction than it is to kind of ensure that their behaviors are corrected through technology.
Yeah, I never said that it's going to be easy. I fully agree with what you said.
I think it's a high time to wrap it up. And I do believe that all the technologies that are coming with are on one side aim at basically bringing more convenience and meeting the demand of more demanding customers, but at the same time they actually make a positive change in those small areas in this whole ecosystem, making positive impact in the environment. And what Jinder said, like the quick commerce example, they help on two levels. One thing is just reducing emissions and reducing waste on the last mile delivery, but also they're reducing waste because we basically buy more often and buy whatever we need at the time that we need it. We don't overstock, and that food that we would buy normally once a week in a big store don't go to waste, don't go to the bin. And I guess this is a wrap up. Next week we'll have the last session, and we'll speak about fast fashion. We'll have two guests from Mad Jeans. I will speak about how to slow down the fast fashion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye.